Okay, class, we're going to get started with our next lecture, which is nutrition and physical activity. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started with our material. So one thing to keep in mind about this lecture is it's very surface level. It's very simplistic. You will take another nutrition course if you're a kinesiology major that will go into a lot of detail about how to program different types of diets for exercise, sports, etc. All right, so first thing is I'm going to take a look at that definition of a calorie. It's pretty interesting, and it's not something you would normally think of when you think of the caloric content on the back of the food that you eat, of food label. But that definition basically just tells us that calories are energy, and that's how I like to look at calories. That's how much energy that can increase and produce or increase, temperature and produce heat. And so. We know calories are supplied in three forms, which you see right here. And we will look at nutrients in detail, discussing carbs, proteins, and fats. Finn, stop. And with each one of those, they'll have one or several slides, and then we'll touch on water and briefly talk about vitamins and minerals. If you see here, there's a link down here at the bottom that does go into more detail about these different nutrients if you're interested in watching that and getting just kind of a better understanding of nutrients as a whole. All right, so first with protein, one thing we have to know is how much energy does it actually supply per gram? And that's going to be 4 kcals. Something else to keep in mind is kcal versus calorie. That K stands for kilocalorie. In the United States, we, in most English kind of speaking countries, well, I take that back. United States especially, we use calorie and kcal like synonymously, like together. There's actually a difference if you go over to Europe. Some of the labels are in kilocalories, and it will say like instead of like 400 calories, it'll say like 40,000 calories. And so they have different kind of understanding of kcal versus calorie, but that will probably be explained more in your sports nutrition course. But for the purposes of this, we'll just say like it's for kcals and calories, same thing. We see that it does take up a good chunk of our diet, or it should 10 to 35% of our intake should be protein. But it's not actually a source of energy. Most of you probably know what protein does for us. If it doesn't supply us energy, like for everyday activities or exercise, then what does it actually do? It helps to repair muscle tissue that was damaged due to exercise or injury. And then it also helps to build muscle growth for growth purposes, which we know as muscle hypertrophy. It also has other roles, such as like transporting hormones throughout the body. It also helps with building up content like in our hair, skin, nails, bones. There's some sort of like protein component. But mainly for us, it just helps with building or repairing muscle fibers in our tissue. No. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. They're nitrogen containing. They're the only macro that contains nitrogen. Between carbs, fats, proteins are the only ones that have nitrogen in them. We have complete and incomplete proteins. If you look at the pictures, you can kind of assume what the difference is between the two. Complete proteins are usually animal origin, and they have all the necessary amino acids needed to like fuel the body, like all those essential amino acids, where incomplete proteins are usually plant-based or plant origin, and they do contain protein, but just in smaller amounts, and they contain less of the essential amino acids needed for the body. With essential versus non-essential amino acids, we have to consume like the essential amino acids daily. That's why there's a protein recommendation. But the non-essential amino acids, our body will actually make those for us. With protein, we want to understand how much do we actually need. And so these recommendations are from NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association. And the average adult we see is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. If you need to know how to convert your pounds into kilograms, there's equations for that. And then once you get your weight into kilograms, you multiply it by 0.8, and that will tell you how many grams of protein your body needs. An average adult is someone who who does not engage in a lot of exercise or activity, and they just do like the daily kind of walking, but nothing too strenuous. We see endurance athletes, higher percentage, and then strength athletes even higher or can go up to that 1.7. But my question is, what happens if we don't consume enough protein? Our body will start to break down break down kind of our muscle tissue for energy. And I know that's confusing because I said a second ago that our body doesn't actually use protein for energy. It can if our exercise intensity is like too high and the body can't use fats, and maybe we run out of glucose in our bloodstream for carbohydrates, and we've run out of our muscle glycogen stores, then the body can turn to protein or amino acids for fuel, which is found in our muscles. So muscle wasting can occur. It is like on the extreme side of not consuming enough protein. But what happens when we consume too much? Too much protein in the body can first just be converted to fat. Same thing, like if we consume too much carbohydrates, too much protein, it's just converted to fat and stored on the body for energy. If we consume too much, it can also interfere with how the body filters nitrogen during the breakdown process of amino acids, and that can cause some harm to our kidneys, and we basically just excrete it, but doing it over and over time, like over and over again, like over time, that can lead to issues. Okay, on to fats. We see that fats have a higher caloric value, so 9 calories per gram. Fat has a lot of different, there's basically a lot of different types of fat: saturated, unsaturated, trans fat. Another term you'll hear with fat is lipids. Lipids is like the largest umbrella, and then we have fats, and then all the different types of fats. Fats have a lot of roles, such as providing satiety when we eat, making us feel full and satisfied. They transport other nutrients. They help as an insulator for the body. And they do complete a good chunk of our diet, 20 to 30%. The difference between saturated, unsaturated, and trans fats really just has to do with the hydrogen bonds contained in the actual fat structure, which I will not get into, but we kind of classify them as healthy and unhealthy. Trans fats have actually been eliminated out of the foods that we consume, in products like processed foods. They have been banned by the FDA, so there's no longer added trans fats. They may occur naturally in some like animal products. Saturated fats are considered to be solid at room temperature, where we can like actually see the visible fat, usually on like animal origin food, like animal foods. Unsaturated fats are usually liquid at room temperature, like think of like the oils on nuts and like avocados, salmon, plants, whatever. Fats do have a lot of roles, like I said earlier, such as aiding the body in hormone regulation. We have to have enough body fat stored in order for certain hormones to be regulated. They help the body to have energy at rest and during low intensity exercise. So if you're sitting down here watching this video or walking on a treadmill while watching this at like a low intensity, your body's burning fat to basically help you move, pay attention, whatever. But one thing we actually know about fat is we cannot deplete fat stores through exercise alone, because when we start exercising, especially at higher intensities, our body switches to burning carbohydrates and does not prefer to burn fats for fuel. And so that's a whole other topic that you'll learn about in exercise physiology. But that's why we usually can't deplete fat. Even like really elite athletes still have a significant amount of calories stored on their body as fat, because it's like a non-depletable source. We can't deplete it. Like I said a second ago, consuming excess carbs and protein usually is stored as fat as well if it's not used anywhere else in the body. On to carbohydrates, we go back to that 4 kcals per gram, so very similar to just like protein, but this is the highest percentage of our diet. This is our main source of energy. Like I said, at rest though, our body does prefer to use fat because fat is broken down at a slower rate. And if our energy demand is not very high, like sitting down and not doing anything, or resting, or we're not demanding energy very quickly, the body can use fat because the rate at which fat provides energy is slow. But if we start exercising or moving or doing something prolonged, carbohydrates is what the body prefers because it's broken down quicker and provides energy faster. We have simple and complex carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates are anything found in like candies or sports drinks, anything that's in like an isolated form of sugar. We have monosaccharides and disaccharides, which means there's either one sugar or two sugars for monosaccharide and disaccharide, which means they're broken apart very easily, which means they're digested very quickly in the body. They provide energy rapidly. So they're actually pretty good to consume if you need really quick sugar, so quick energy, quick blood sugar increase for exercise. But complex carbs are actually better in the long run when we want to store carbohydrates in the body. Complex carbs are called polysaccharides, and they are your starchy vegetables, your complex fruits, like bananas or any type of grain or rice, pasta, whatever, beans. But your fruits are on the simpler side, like berries and such, because they're broken down very quickly. So we store carbohydrates in muscle, liver, and then we also store it in our blood. Our blood sugar is readily available for use, whereas if it's taken from the muscle or the liver, it's a longer breakdown process. In order to get that energy to you. Like I said, high intensity exercise, such as doing any type of sprint workout or high intensity cardio bout, or weightlifting or playing a sport that's a pretty moderate to high intensity, our body really wants to use carbohydrates, but it's a depletable source. We can actually deplete it. Usually about 90 minutes of continuous moderate to high intensity exercise, we see the levels in our muscles actually drop because we've been using it. We've been breaking it down. And so we usually need to replenish that source. That's why we see a lot of athletes consume like gel packets or any type of sugar, really like a gummy or something, that will help to replenish their sugar levels so they can keep exercising at that high intensity. Someone who's more active will need a higher caloric intake. So we see 55 to 60% of their carbohydrates coming, or fuel energy coming from carbohydrates, so they can store it in their muscles and save it for later so they can exercise at higher intensities for longer. All right, water. Water is pretty amazing. Makes up over half of our body. And all of our muscle contains water, organs contain water. It's in our bloodstream. It's everywhere. It aids in digestion and elimination. And without it, we will become constipated, which can lead to a lot of internal issues. We know that water carries nutrients in our bloodstream and throughout our body. It's important for many chemical reactions. There's some reactions in the body called condensation reactions, which require the presence of an H2O molecule in order for it to take place. So we do have to have water in our body for that. And then optimal performance and health, it also helps to keep our temperature on the lower side. Usually when we're sick, they say to, or if we have a fever, overheated, to drink more fluids to help bring our temperature down. How much water per day is needed to maintain optimal bodily functions? That kind of old saying used to be like 8 cups of water, 8 glasses of water a day. That's a little outdated. It's going to be a little bit more than that. For males, it's kind of closer to that 13 to 15 cups. And females, usually tending to be in smaller bodies, is on that like 11 to 13 cups of water. So the water intake either has increased or there's been more research to basically determine that the human body actually does need more than just 8 cups a day. When we exercise, sweat loss occurs, which decreases our body fluid, and it decreases something called plasma volume. If you're familiar with the word plasma, it's the component, the watery component of our blood. When we lose water, the plasma volume drops and blood becomes more viscous. So now it's thicker and it's trying to travel around the body and it's traveling slower due to the viscosity. This can lead to an increase in blood pressure because now we have less blood returning to the heart at a certain rate that it actually should be returning. This will actually increase heart rate because your body now has to work harder to get that blood back to the heart. And this is called cardiovascular drift. And this cardiovascular drift basically is when your blood pressure starts to increase, your stroke volume drops. Stroke volume is just how much blood is leaving the heart from the ventricles with every contraction. That will drop, but now your heart has to work overtime in order to keep the amount of blood returning back to your heart. And this can cause overheating and lead to a myriad of other problems. So core body temperature increases and basically causes your body to be in a stressful state. So again, drinking water, especially during exercise when you're sweating, is very important. This next video here I find really, really funny. So please watch this little clip. You can play it down here at the bottom on your slides. And I just want you to think about, how do you feel about this constant stream of conflicting information about the macronutrients that we're consuming, vitamins, minerals, different types of food that we're eating? This video is pretty funny. And I basically want you to think about, how do you choose which information to listen to? After you listen to this video, you'll be like, oh, wow, okay, that's really interesting. My point of watching this, for you to watch this, is to basically make sure all your information is from a reputable source. Somebody who has a PhD in nutrition, or somebody who's certified by a certification that offers nutrition training. So again, just make sure that the information that you're taking and using for yourself is from a reputable source. Let's talk about the best diet. The best diet is probably not what you think, and it's something that we can take and turn it into something that's individualized and customized for everybody. We do know that it does include all 6 nutrients. You really do. We don't want to have an elimination diet unless you have an actual health problem that you need to eliminate something, fine. But we need to include all of the nutrients. We need something that actually influences our health and makes us feel good. We need something sustainable, something that we can actually sustain for long term, not just a quick fix. It needs to be personalized, customized to you. That's where the trial and error comes in. See how your body reacts. And then also simple and flexible for maybe days that you are traveling and you can't eat what you really want to or you need to, days where you don't have time to cook like whatever meal. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we want to think about the best diet. But there's this word healthy that we all use or we hear a lot, and everyone has their own idea of what healthy actually means. And so I want you to think of, what do you actually consider healthy? And that may actually be different than what someone else considers healthy. For example, my mom considers healthy to be like low fat diets, but we actually know now that fat is actually necessary, and there's healthy fats that can make up a really amazing diet. Where for me, I think a healthy diet involves eating whole foods, like foods that don't have a label, like such as fruits and vegetables and meats and grains and things that are naturally occurring. And so everyone has their own definition of what health actually means. And so I want you to think about, what do you define as healthy? Some other questions just to kind of ask yourself and think about: is diet or exercising more important when it comes to weight loss? And how can we increase weight loss mostly from fat tissue? This little video down here at the bottom, this little link, we'll answer the first question and talk about diet versus exercise, but I think it's individualized. I really think it depends on the person. And then this next one, the second question, is how do we increase weight loss mostly from fat tissue? When we lose weight, we think of like, okay, 100% of the weight I've lost. What percent actually came from fat? Well, we want it to all be 100% of the weight that I've lost. But sometimes we actually lose muscle when we start dieting and we don't add exercise. And so dieting is really amazing and is really great to lose fat mass, but in order to maintain muscle tissue while you're losing fat, adding exercise, especially resistance training, will help to mitigate the loss from muscle and make it 100% of the weight that you lose be from fat. Kind of the last topic here is discussing basal metabolic rate. Basal metabolic rate, or BMR, is how much energy we expend at rest. This is if I was lying still, not doing any exercise for like the entire day. How many calories would my body burn to actually keep me alive? So our body works to maintain organ function. It works to maintain temperature, and that requires energy. So how much energy is required to keep me alive? Well, everyone's different. Everyone has a different BMR. And so what factors determine someone's BMR? And so these kind of ones you want to jot down is body size. Larger bodies expend more energy due to a greater surface area. So larger size, larger body. Males tend to have a higher BMR because males tend to have larger bodies. And so larger bodies expend more energy due to the greater surface area. Males also tend to have more muscle mass. Muscle mass is a metabolically active tissue that burns energy compared to females who tend to have less muscle mass. So muscle mass is a big factor that increases BMR. Another one is age. As we age, our BMR goes down because we're losing muscle mass. Muscle atrophy occurs with age. And so again, coming back to the muscle mass, that affects it. Other factors would be someone who uh, is anxious and has this influx of hormones that would increase energy expenditure, increase temperature. That can cause someone's BMR to be higher. And then you're probably thinking, okay, like what about exercise and diet? Well, that is on this next slide here. So we talked about BMR, but there's another term, energy expenditure, the amount of energy that we expend in 24 hours. This takes into account physical activity and TEF, which is the thermal effect of food. That's where your diet comes in because some foods require energy to digest, where other foods don't really require that much energy to digest. So your diet, your physical activity, and your BMR all affect your energy expenditure. So there's an assignment that you'll do, and you will have to use this link down here at the bottom to figure out the difference between BMR and energy expenditure. Okay, so we'll discuss that assignment later, but here's your link to do that. And when I talk about that assignment, we'll explore that. Okay, all right, great. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next video. Okay.